The lesson.
Oh yeah.
KAB101.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming through.
Yeah, my pleasure.
During tricky times,
Yeah,
as we discussed before.
Yeah.
Obviously treating you're getting through it okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah. Now look, you have a very solid and extensive history in the graffiti thing in Australia, and I think, to my understanding, early 80s is when you first sort of started picking up a can and getting into it.
Yeah, kind of about 83. I was doing kind of marker tags, but they were kind of more like a punk rock kind of writing / logos that we used to call them. They were kind of like nicknames that looked like a tag, but they weren't quite a tag. Sort of something similar that you might find at someone's drawing when they sign the bottom of their illustration, like a comic artist or a designer would have a bit of a more articulate signature than their standard signature. So that's where that came from. And so another guy, KAB101 and I, we were friends in primary school. We sort of started when we were both involved with the punk rock music scene, listening to it, too young to sort of participate. We kind of had these sort of sub names we called logos, which were things that we'd sign our artwork with, similar to what I said before. You could kind of, I don't know, look at it along the lines of not just a signature, but almost like a moniker or a alias type thing. So we would actually write those around prior to writing that we know of today, which came later. So 83 was kind of the punk rock sort of stuff. I then moved to the country, and from there, in about 84, we started sort of seeing it pop up in films like graffiti writing as it is today. I'd actually seen it on a daytime TV show when I was sick at home one day. It was just like a daytime detective show. These kids take this guy into a yard in New York, and they're painting all these names on the train. I was fascinated with it. I'd seen it before in photos, but never kind of knew what it was. These guys, they get caught by the police. The detective somehow gets them out of trouble. That's all I remember. Still haven't tracked it down to this day. Ironic thing is, only last year, a guy came up to me at one of my openings and said, I was home the same day, I saw the same film, know exactly what you're talking about. The only reason I remember it is because I heard you talk about it one time when I was on Triple J. I brought the same story up. And he gave me that same point-by-point articulation of what I saw. And to this day, I don't know what it's called.
So he didn't know what it was either?
No, he had no idea. He didn't really have an interest in graffiti. He just saw it and sort of heard the interview years later and managed to track me down at an exhibition opening and came up to me, and I remembered him from school. I just didn't click, and he told me the same story. He goes, yeah, I was home the same day, saw the same film, don't know what it was, but heard you talk about it, and yeah, I've seen it, and that was just blew me away. I still don't know what it's called. I research all the time looking for it.
Yeah,
so it's a daytime TV show. I thought it might be this show or film that people got in the 80s called Dreams Don't Die. I'd never seen that until recently. It's definitely not film, so I'm still looking, So that was 84, and then all the films came out, like your breaking kind of films, Beach Street, you've got the Warriors, all that kind of stuff that had graffiti in it. That's kind of when the whole writing like I do now took over, and we got the hip hop marketing thing, pretty much like through all the films and books, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how it started. We were painting in 84, like with spray paint. The problem is there's not too many photos. People know what I'm on about. I know other people that remember the pieces, they've seen them. But look, I didn't have a camera until probably 86. So I don't actually have copies myself of some of the imagery I first painted. There are a couple of guys that may still have it, and I'm trying to track them down. So you never know. Yeah.
And then so I guess most people's introduction to graffiti is, through the hip hop culture.
Yeah.
In some way, shape or form.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And so you mentioned that you got into it really through the punk sort of scene before it was really known as what graffiti is now known today.
Yeah, it's different kind of. It wasn't really writing like it is today, where you just write your name and get up and get noticed, and you know, you try and develop style. This was just a sort of anarchic kind of vandalistic approach to, you know, to graffiti. Like in the punk rock scene, they've all got aliases, like all the singers and people in the bands. Same within the ska scene, people had aliases. It was just something that around that period, every sort of kid around my age group had some sort of nickname or odd little moniker type thing. Once all the hip hop based films kicked in, it started to really take a turn. That's where we were like, oh shit, this is incredible. I'd seen photos of New York subway car painted before in a book article for Style Wars, or Subway Art, sorry. I hadn't seen the book, but that, seeing the footage in the daytime show made me understand that, hey, this is, you know, something else is going on here. Like you'd look at a Twisted Sister record cover, because I was into rock and punk and stuff, and there'd be a piece by Vulcan on the inside of the cassette in LA or something like that. So it's kind of like this weird crossover thing was there, but once the hip hop films kicked in, it sort of that was where the energy kicked in with, we want to paint, we want to write our names. Took a while to work out what was going on, because where we lived was rural. We didn't have a lot of, well, I didn't see Subway up to 85. My friend Battle Boots, who I wasn't friends with at the time I met him, he had a copy. I think it was the second copy in South Australia. The first was brought over from a guy who brought it back from America. So he'd like probably the first import copy. I met him one time randomly in a tunnel while he was doing some graffiti, and I was doing some graffiti with the guy I was writing with at the time. Pulled out this book. I'd never seen anything like it, you know. From seeing a few images to a bit of footage and a couple of breakdance or Beach Street sort of films to just seeing all this name writing, it was mind blowing. It was just opened up the doors. You know, back then I would still be walking around with sort of like tennis shoes, tight jeans, a Motorhead jacket, you know, punk t-shirt, whatever. You know, he had a bit more boots. This had more of a intuition of the breakdance thing. I got into that as well, you know. I got into the hip hop thing fully, loved it. Still listen to all my original music, but obviously hip hop became the predominant sound force at the time. We kind of got into it not really knowing what we're doing, so it's just experimentation. And I think it was a year later that book popped up in a bookstore where I was living, and I went in and I grabbed it straight away. We were sitting in the car afterwards going, let's go get paint, you know, and it was on, you know. So I went from markers to spray paint real quick. I already used spray paint, and I'd already been doing stuff with spray paint, but we need to take it up a notch card. It started to kick in. So by 85, like,
game on.
Yeah, the pieces were getting a bit more, I wouldn't say any better, but we started to have a bit more understanding of spray paint and places to go to paint, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
And then, so if, you know, around the, you know, mid 80s is when you start, you know, taking it to that next level.
Yeah.
What were you writing when you first, you know?
So 83 was like, I first moved to the country. I had a tag called Monkey, which was one of my first tags. I had other names before that with Kano and stuff. I don't remember what his was at the time, but I moved there, and there was a guy who lived there who had the same nickname. Nothing to do with graffiti, he was just a local guy. So I dropped that name, and I had a couple of other sort of intermediate sort of names before I saw the hip hop films. So I kind of went from Monkey to, there's so many. Skids was one of them, Star FX. You know, Kano wrote Swift. My partner who originally wrote Hip 512 was one of, I had three main partners. At the start it was Hip 512, aka Centura. So this was our first crew in 85, which was FBI. Kano was in that crew as well, as was another guy, Izzy, who was from Adelaide. as was another guy who wrote Aero down in the country as well. Prior to that, all the graffiti we were doing were just writing names and words. So we'd just go out, say Hip and I would go out and go, what do you want to write tonight? I don't know. I'll do a spin, he'll do a twist. You know, still had that breakdance crossover still for a while. And then, but you know, then after that, when we started picking names that we kind of stuck with, that's when we sort of understood the name writing thing a little more, if that makes any sense. So there was also, where we were living was a very small place. It didn't have a lot of people there. And I think it was by 85, they knew me as KAB, the police. So I was informed on early. I never got charged, but they would say, hey, Mr. KAB, we want to talk to you, sort of shit, you know. That's early days.
That early.
So yeah, so people would change their names all the time. I had to drop mine for a while, you know, and change it up to a few names.
Yeah.
I was getting harassed a lot. So
yeah, wow.
by 86, I was writing it again. But then I had other aliases just to keep names going so they couldn't, you know, put two and two together, so to speak.
By 85, you're in it. You got, you know, you got your crew.
Yeah.
You got your word or your words that you're now putting up. And I think when I was speaking to Fo, you know, back in that time when people are running up on yards, there's no fencing.
Yeah, well, I lived in a different area, so there's no, there's only one passenger train with 3 carriages. So there's a choice. You can burn every opportunity to go to every freight yard. If you do that train once, it will just fuck it up. So we never used to pace it at all, which is something I regret. But, you know, maybe towards the end I should have, but I didn't. Things changed.
So what, you didn't hit it because if you hit that, then it just make things too hot? It just ruined the whole yard
for all the freights. So it was basically predominantly freights we were riding on, and brake vans, which are the ones that sit at the end of the freight. I believe Fo mentioned them in his interview, which was the yellow and green cars, but sometimes it'd be white or even like a grey colour, and earlier even maroon, but they were phased out. So they were harder to paint because they were right in the main sheds of where all the action was happening. You've got people living in the yard down one end, plus people who work for the yards who live on the same area, and down the other end, same thing. But you've also got people walking in and out, going to properties, walking home from the pub, cutting through all the time. So there's no fences. But the best areas were where there were fences. There's some spots that there were, because you're locked in. They're not going to just wander up on you. The amount of times I've looked underneath and seen people standing there talking, going, we can smell paint, or did you hear that? And it's us. And we're just sitting there behind wheels waiting for it to leave. It's happened so many times, you know, because you get interrupted at any point. It doesn't matter how late it is. People cutting through or starting work early. There's a mill that worked 24 hours right by the yard. So when there was a shift change in the morning, we'd see cars, sort of lights coming up on the freights and stuff. That was just a change of shift in the morning, you know. Same thing at 6 o'clock at night. People leaving, changing shift. There's always activity there. So it wasn't a good place to spend time. You know, you can spend a lot of time in there, muck around a bit, but if you're painting seriously, you don't want to spend too long in there because you get interrupted quite often. So yeah.
And then, so when I've spoken to riders, a lot of the time, you know, someone schooled them in, you know, on how to hit trains, get into yards, etc., and just work their way around. But being that, you know, you're one of the first in that time.
Yeah, there were older guys than me though that wrote as well, and I wasn't living in the city, so I had no access to passenger cars. So, you know, it was kind of weird. I left the city. Within a year, there was stuff up on all the lines, popping up everywhere. I couldn't tell you who did the first of this and that. I only remember seeing what I saw. I lived on the Lunga line. So, you know, going along, you'd see the showgrounds, the big bad boys, J-Piece, Happy, a little bit of political graffiti. Later on, Master, which was done a little bit later by Wiki, and Sprint, that was probably 86-ish, but before that there were pieces popping up the next time I came up here, and there were tags popping up. And it just seemed to, it was nothing to just odds and ends of just random graffiti which had nothing relevant to the writing culture. Within a year, there's stuff popping up everywhere. And from what I understand when I'd meet some of these people, is there was stuff happening. It just took a while to, you know, eventuate and stuff. So there's people still piecing before that. It's just I'd never seen it, you know.
And then, like the crew that you're in, TDC.
Yeah.
That was the original crew from like when you first.
Yeah, that crew came about. I wrote in a crew, or it was just Boots and I. We had like a bit of a fun name that we used to write, which was TDB. It's a bit of a joke kind of thing. We'd muck around with it. And I had my house raided, and I'd done this death piece, and I was writing Death One back then. I had my house raided, didn't get charged, got harassed a lot. I decided that night to switch up my name to something different, not KAB or anything. I'll dump Death One, I'll go for something else, and that's how the Death connection happened. I rang Boots, I said, hey dude, this is what I want to do. Are you keen? You're my partner at the time, painting, you know. He was keen, and that's how it started. So pretty much me and him started it. At the time, Risk was writing in iOS with Rank. They'd met in Adelaide and Manet. Eventually he came over to TDC. We had a radio show in 86, like a hip hop radio show in 1986 at a community radio station called Radio Clash. One night we rang Rank up because I'd met him through Risk, and he was put down with the crew. Massacre happened to come to Mount Gambier, where I was living, for gymnastics or sport or something. Met him, took him out, did a painting. Next time I saw him, he got put into the crew. Parrish came to Mount Gambier, he'd met Risk. He came back, went back to Adelaide, he did a piece, went back to Adelaide. Eventually he got put in the crew because he was good friends with Risk. So that's how it kind of happened. Manet, the same thing. IS kind of fizzled a bit, and we put him in the crew. So that's kind of how it all kind of started. Then you had Kez, Raid, Strike, you know, all local guys. A few other bits and pieces, guys who were down on and off and stuff. But they were the main guys from that town back then that wrote TDC. They also had other crews as well. So there was another crew called MIA, which is nothing to do with the guys who write it today. This is an older crew. I was put down in that with those guys just to switch it up. When we swapped, we had a couple of members come over to us kind of thing. So I was putting that up again with those guys. I didn't really get it up. I think the first night we did 5 pieces in one night, just MIAs. We actually got chased out of a spot that we didn't go down too well, but at the end we did 5 or something. And I put it up a few times here and there, but it was mainly the younger guys and some guys who weren't in TDC. It was mainly their crew. So, you know, things changed. Boots, when I first met him, we didn't know each other. We'd sort of heard of each other. He had a crew called KGB when we had FBI. So this is 85 era. You know, so this is some of the crew names from back in that day. And then we had there was a whole group of other people who'd hang out. So you'd kind of have kids into hip hop, sort of like your local misfits. So you'd metal kids, hip hop kids, just articulate kids that didn't quite fit in. You know, they might have been a bit nerdy or a bit different. We all sort of hung out in one kind of group, and you know, we'd take a radio, go sit in the park at night, hang out, listen to music, that kind of stuff. After the radio station would finish, we'd leave at 1 a.m. We'd pretty much go to a band shell type area in the park, take the radio, plug it in, beers, whatever you want to do. You know, everyone would sit around. Some kids would break. I wasn't into it by then. I only did it for a little while. I realised I wasn't really that good at it. I wasn't that confident of putting myself out there. So I made a conscious decision to just draw, and the graffiti or the writing thing was what I was about. That overtook me more than the breaking. So I just wasn't athletic, you know. Never been a sporty guy. My idea of sport was, I don't know, me and a couple of mates throwing javelin, you know, which is fluoro tubes off a rooftop or something, you know. that's about as sporty as I got, and jumping fences.
So could you then technically say that the TDC thing, you know, I guess originally like sparked off because like of the raid, because you got raided?
Yeah, it did because I had to stop writing that. And I'd only done a few pieces, like 4 pieces or something with the name and written it as well, gotten up a bit, but not a lot with it. And it was just not worth hanging on to after they came to my house. Risk, he got raided with me. Boots wasn't there. We were going back to take photos, and we were in there taking photos. We were followed all the way back to where I was lived. The guy who worked by the yard had a business that was right on the yard. He followed onto the police with a CB radio back then it was.
Oh, wow.
All back streets. We didn't see him. Like, we were on push bikes with a camera. You know, I borrowed a camera off my dad and took photos of this end to end. And I'd like, I don't know, it was like 4 cars and a bike out the front of my house, all banging on the door. I had to wake up my dad because I was underage. I wouldn't let him in anyway.
So how old were you when this happened?
16, 17 maybe.
What time did they rock through?
Sorry?
What time did the police come knocking on the door?
It was probably like maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 o'clock. I'd gone to
in the
get
middle of the
photos.
day.
They'd followed us, and then this guy brought them to my house, and they were just around the house. So I had to wake up my dad, pulled the film out of his camera. He stuck another one in before he went to the door. Just in case they took the film, they didn't. They turned around and pretty much said with no doubt that these are the guys that did the painting, but they had no evidence and we wouldn't agree to it. We didn't admit to anything, you know, so they just let it go. One of many harassments, I suppose, down the track, so, yeah.
No shit. So that's the first time you got raided, but that wasn't the last.
No, it was probably the first time they went. We got raided in the yard, not my house raided. I got my house raided later. That was a different thing altogether. But that was my first kind of... No, actually, that's not true. I'd been arrested for a couple other things, smaller things, not to do with graff. You know, a few trespassy type things. Nothing important, nothing bad, nothing that would put a, you know, dampener on anything. It's just one of those things. You're a kid, you get into trouble.
Scallywag shit.
Yeah, sort of stupid shit, I suppose you'd call it. Treading where you're not supposed to, that kind of thing. Exploration, mapping out your local environment, seeing what's there. So, and usually it was something connected to a yard or something. And, you know, it was always some offshoot to do with riding and stuff. So, yeah, the whole thing that day when the yard got raided by cops, you know, it was a different thing because back then they came in there. By the time they came in there, we were out of there. This guy was following us. So we didn't actually get a raid, like we had to run from them. We just naturally left and they'd come in, we were gone, they saw the train. The guy had followed us, he's on the CB. I don't know how he did the CB, whether I suppose they had CBs back then. They came to my house, bang, bang, bang on the door. You know, that was it sort of thing. So, yeah. Well, that's when I'd have to drop the name, you know.
Now we're talking, you know, the mid to late 80s. And from my knowledge and understanding, around maybe late 80s, early 90s is when you started to hear or see 73A, JBL, NA, you know, the prominent crews.
NA, I reckon those guys I kind of met in the 90s, but late 80s, like some of the 73A guys, before they were 73A, had a crew called CSI, and one rider who was in at Rust put me and Risk into that crew. So these guys would come down to where I was living in Mount Gambier, hang out, you know, people like Tense, I don't know, Sway, Waste, all kinds of people. Foe would come down, not that he was 73A or CSI back then, but, you know, Foe, Rank, Plebe, who was Manet, yeah, a heap of people came down, would visit and stuff.
So prior to 73A being 73A, a lot of those dudes were CSI.
Yeah, I don't know how many of them were just 73A,
but some of
the guys I knew became
okay.
73A.
And then but you got put on.
I was in CSI before
yeah.
73 I was around, and then what happened when I finally moved up, and then there was a period where I didn't see anyone for a long time. Risk caught up with them a bit more than I did, and Lace, who was a Mount Gambier person as well, she would catch up with Waste, and those guys were sort of kept in contact. I actually moved to Melbourne for a period, so I went from the country to Melbourne and was there for a while, and eventually had to move back to SA, had to leave and come back to SA. And I lived back in the country for a while, and then I boogied up to Adelaide. About 90, I reckon, I moved here.
Okay, and then when that happened, you got put on to CSI.
No, this was in the 80s. This was like 87 when they'd come down to see us.
So
So I moved, it's a bit jumbled up. So basically when we put in CSI, it might have been 87, and we did a bit of stuff with that and with those guys, and then I moved to Melbourne. I got put into MSA, which is Melbourne crew. Similar interests with music and the way we looked at stuff and what we're interested with those guys, got on really well with them all. So I was put into that crew and hung out with them a lot when I was living in Melbourne, and met other people obviously along the way. But Boots and I would actually go to Melbourne a bit from the country. Like, catch a bus and then a train to get there, and stay at people's houses, and we'd met up with heaps of riders. It was crazy back then. There'd be 30 guys on a train with a beatbox, jumping off one line to another line, and insides, and popping doors open, and everyone piling out in the yard and running through the yard. It was crazy. It was just never seen anything like it, you know. And dudes were getting up. It's like 30 guys with markers, you know. I'd seen similar stuff in Adelaide in 85, 86, where we'd all go to the bench at Myers, and then groups would just walk around, getting up all through the city. Half the shops weren't open on the weekends, you know, after Saturday, 12 o'clock. So I was lucky. I got to sort of meet a lot of really cool dudes at an early age, but I kind of kept to myself a lot as well. I kind of kept in contact with certain people and tried to disconnect from the negative. There was some idiots writing, you know, basically some thieving, deadhead kind of, not very intelligent dudes, and they're not around now, you know what I mean? So I avoided all that bullshit that went with it, and just stuck with what I was interested in, which is pushing style forward. So I wasn't very good at tagging or anything like that. All my friends were way better. My thing was more about developing letters, but I like to do throw-ups and freights. That was one of my favourite things ever, you know.
And when you talk about, you know, I guess people coming into the graffiti thing that you try to stay clear of. One thing that Fo said in his interview, which I thought was really, real interesting, is he said when NWA come out, shit shifted, where graffiti was obviously influenced by that. Yeah. And then the criminal element sort of started to come into it.
Yeah, that's actually true, because we had the radio station, I think, you know, started in 86, and we're playing lots of sort of older kind of hip hop, you know, all kinds of stuff, hard to explain without listing off names, like UTFO and I don't know, you know, a lot of the street sounds, electro compilations, a lot of that sort of music. That's what the sort of stuff I liked, which was more the electro outlook, or they call it freestyle, some of it. That's the stuff I enjoyed. More electronic, hard hitting, lots of stabs and break beats, and, you know, the rapping was sort of second to the music in a way, that they were such good rappers, and the music was so good that it just sounded awesome. This is way before the days of just swearing over the mic for attention, that kind of bullshit. So yeah, what happened when we noticed that there was a big stagnant period sort of between all these amazing records coming out. There was a bit of a stagnant period where things sort of went a bit, I don't know, just a bit ordinary with the music side of it. And then, you know, it went from Ice-T, which was great, Rhyme Syndicate, all that sort of stuff. All of a sudden, went from that, which was kind of like a gangsterish type rap, to Schoolie D, which was fucking incredible. You know, I still listen to it this day. You know, and then it kind of went to, I suppose, the 7A3 kind of sound cooler than Cali, and then a lot of that kind of era, and then the NWA stuff come out, Eazy-E, all that kind of gear. And we loved it, you know, at the time it was great. But I do think it had a lot to do with people going from expressive sort of stuff within hip hop, say dance culture, expression in fashion, writing and MCing and DJing to more tough guy shit, you know. And it reflected the people that wrote. So some guys just wanted to be sort of tagger dudes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, throw a little style in there, you know. That's the way I looked at it. And some of the attitudes of shit. Some guys were great, you know, and they were really into it. But it was just one of those things. I noticed that people became a bit more pack mentality, as in like, you know, instead of more individual people doing something amazing, more groups of people, not necessarily crews, but lots of hangers on, more crime, more, I suppose, people getting robbed and that sort of association, but less positive kind of outlook, if it makes any sense. Like some guys were really good and they still were into all that shit. Some guys were just idiots, so I just kept away, you know, easier.
So would you say around that time is, because, you know, it's no secret that the element of beef, you know, either has been or is quite prevalent in the graffiti culture.
Yeah.
Because you got crews, people going over each other.
Yeah.
You know, certain people run
That's
certain
yards. More like a
yards.
90s thing for me. I that's what I remember. You know, it might have been different because I didn't live in Adelaide. I lived in the country. Then I went to Melbourne, returned, lived there for a bit longer, then moved to Adelaide. By the time I got to Adelaide, I kind of disconnected from, like, the bench had kind of dispersed, your writer's bench had dispersed. It wasn't like when I used to come up here on a Friday night, you would meet down in Rundle Street, certain spot in the mall. In the early 80s, you used to meet at Myers. There was all these different spots. All that had kind of gone away and everyone had gone off into their own groups. And I just noticed there were just a lot more people that just didn't really bring a lot to the party, but they had a lot of vocal exercise, like just crapping on and just, I don't know, full of shit, I suppose you'd call them. But, you know, there were some incredible dudes doing stuff, and I sort of miss those bench days. We'd show the photos, you'd go and find a piece, not just jump on the internet and look it up. You'd have to go and catch a train to find the spot. Same with getting paint. It was nothing at fingertips. All this shit had to be kind of worked out, and not everyone would tell each other. You know, it's kind of, you had to work out a lot for yourself. And if you got along well with someone, they might give you a bit of info, but a lot of it was, you know, finding out a lot of stuff yourself. So, yeah.
Mentioning the 90s, obviously by that point there was, you know, numerous crews around, and it was really all happening.
Yeah.
I guess in Adelaide, JBL, NA, 73A, RCF, they were kind of like, you know, from my understanding, the big four.
Yeah, they were the bombing crews. They're the ones that did kind of like got up heaps, did pieces, did it all kind of thing. Our crew kind of was more, I don't know, style kids that did, you know, like someone like Rank and Mane bombed a fucking lot. But by the point where we were all kind of living here together, I'd moved into different interests, different areas. I kind of, I don't know, changed direction a little. Some of the other guys had gone into music more than writing. So, you know, say Perish and Risk or Prism, they had the Red Eyed Peas, the MC Crew, Unity prior to that, you know, and that was crossover of a few other different people involved with music, that kind of thing. So the emphasis of the painting was more, you know, we would just kind of, our whole thing was just to try and do good pieces, I suppose. So, yeah.
And then in, like, I guess when, you know, these crews are out there doing their thing, and I guess they're the bombing crews, they're the ones that get getting up the most.
Yeah.
Which of those crews, if any, did you guys have, like, the closest ties with?
I reckon NA, because of Rank's affiliation with them. So I met all those guys through him. I didn't know any of those guys. There's so many writers I've never met, you know, because I knew all these guys in the early days, and I kind of didn't turn my back on it, but I just chose my own path, you know. So, yeah, NA, and then some of the RCF guys, some of the JBL guys. It's hard to say because knew people just through different things as well, not just through graph. So you kind of like, you know, I knew Fo before RCF I even knew of what RCF was. You know, I knew him from years ago. Sway and Tense, same thing. Knew them from the CSI days. JBL, probably in the 90s, met a few. I knew a few of them, you know, caught up with those guys a bit. Sort of later 90s it would have been. Yeah, so it's sort of like hard to say. Like, a lot of the guys I kind of in contact with the older kind of guys. Makes any sense?
Early 90s, the Adelaide Graffiti documentary.
Spray Conflict?
Yeah. Was that early 90s?
90s is a weird area.
Yeah. Somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's in there. It's so what happened with that was I was doing stuff with Carclew Youth Arts Centre and was doing a bit of sort of like, not workshops, but sort of workshops up there where I teach a few kids, but also paint on boards with friends. And, you know, my partner did some of her first pieces there. You know, she'd written before that, but not writing, like, she didn't have a set tag or anything. She just write her name and spray paint. But she actually started doing a few pieces on boards and on these walls as well around that period. And I'd meet some of the guys who were doing quite a lot of stuff today when they were younger. And yeah, what happened was the guy had got a grant to do this film and said to me, would I come to Melbourne with him to introduce him to some people for the film and some people in Adelaide. And so I introduced him to heaps of people, and he'd never made a film before. I didn't know that. And he put out that documentary. So it was a strange experience. Like, I don't think he knew what he was getting into. A lovely guy, you know, still a great guy to this day. Don't see him very often, but yeah, he's a good dude. Yeah.
And I think Puzzle, he featured in that with you.
Yeah, Jill. There's a whole heap of people in it. Jill, Murder, Break, heaps of people, and a lot of Adelaide dudes and Sydney dudes, and yeah. So there's quite a few people involved with it. With
putting out a documentary like that, like, is there any issues with, you know, the authorities because you're putting, you know, like you're putting that, and especially that time, like now, graph DVDs, magazines, YouTube videos, it's everywhere. But I imagine back there it was rarer and probably was a bit more like, whoa.
It wasn't, there was a few DVDs that were out and about before that, not DVDs for sale, but just video documentary. So, you know, Sydney had a few good ones in the early 80s where, I don't even know, some reporter would go down and lay up with them down to St. James and film them, you know, and then you'd have stuff, say, on the Factory on Sunday mornings. They have a battle between Melbourne and Sydney. So there's lots of little mini doco things that were made, but nothing really put out sort of like that. And, you know, it's pretty rough for its time. Like, it's not the way I would have done it, but, you know, it got put out there. I don't really like looking back on it myself. Sort of that had its time, its place, not so relevant now. But, you know, it's one of those things that, it got me busted for doing a panel and some run-ups, the film.
I got you in trouble.
Yeah.
Oh, so the cops came looking for you off the back of that documentary when it got released.
Yeah, I never got caught, but the filmmaker got caught and he had all the footage, and they raided the room of where he was staying, I was staying, my partner was staying, and I'd left the room. I'd gone back to find my partner and just happened to walk in when the transits were there. Bad timing. Oh. And, you know,
so I
walked into the room, my partner had left, she'd gone to get food. Transits raided, no one there. They had the filmmaker, they already had him in custody. They had sent 2 transits to the room to raid it. One was this guy, PJ, Notorious Transit for back then, and this other TK. And you wouldn't tell the cops, they looked like surf bums, floral shirts, fucking shorts, big moustaches, you know, that real kind of village people look. And yeah, pretty much. They didn't know I was a writer. The guy in the film, who made the film, said I was only a camera assistant. So he didn't understand that it doesn't matter, you're in that yard with him, you get charged.
Yeah.
So I was, fuck man, you know, bad timing. So anyway, they grabbed me, put me in the car, driving down the road straight away, the driver's punching me in the face, PJ. Driving down St Kilda Road, punching me in the face. I can't do a thing. Just got to take it, you know. If I hit him back, I'll put my arm up, assault. I'm not stupid. So punching into me, threats, all this way, going, you fuck, blah, blah, blah. You know, we want to know who you're with, blah, blah, blah. So I was in there for about 8 hours or something, and I wouldn't agree to anything they're saying, just denied everything. And it got to the point where I knew they were going to see the footage that the guy, the filmmaker had in his thing, and I went, oh fuck, I want to leave. So basically, I turned around and said to him, and this is the thing, they didn't hit me once I was in the transit office, which is...
They did it on the way.
No, but this is the thing, dudes do. I know guys have had guns stopped down their throat, 2 dudes, you know, and been bashed in the transit office. So, you know, I was expecting anything. But yeah, pretty much what happened was I turned around and said to him, I will tell you what I was involved with, and that's it. That's all you're getting. Or we can sit here like this for days, and you'll get you can charge me and let me go, and that's all you're getting. So they went, okay, you know, they wanted to know who I was with. I said, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. These guys got picked up, blah, blah, blah. They go, where'd you go beforehand? I said, I didn't go anywhere. We went to go paint, because prior to that, some of the guys in the car had gone somewhere and eaten and all this. So I didn't know any of this stuff. I got picked up at the end, which was true. And pretty much just said that I did this train. They go, what does it say? I said, it says Raz. They go, Kaz? I go, no, because Kaz was wanted over in Melbourne for panels. I go, no, Raz. It said KAB, you know. I said, it's unfinished, blah, blah, blah. They then turned around, they charged me for it. They wanted to know who I was with. I said, I don't know who these guys are, man. I can tell you the filmmaker's name and his details. That's all I know. And they go, well, we've already got him. That's why you're here. So pretty much at the end of the day, I had to go through a book, and they wanted me to pick out who I was with. And all I could do was, one guy was particularly taller than the other. And so I just tried to pick someone that looked nothing like him. And I just went, it looks kind of like this. It was a breaker from the 80s, and whacking ahead. That's the first one. I'm like, okay, this is where it starts, you know. They said, he's been dead since 1985. I'm like, I can't help you anymore. This is it. So that's when I just stopped talking, and eventually just let me go. I got charged with cutting the fence, doing the panel, carrying implements, and something else. They try and get anything, you know.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So yeah, pretty much that got me charged, and then as soon as I went to court for that, I got arrested again. I got sentenced to 3 months for cutting the fence, 3 months for the panel.
Oh, they gave you 3 months?
Yeah, for the cutting fence of the panel, right?
Inside?
Yeah. So what happened then was I adjourned it, went up to the court lawyer and said, I want to, you know, basically fight this. They released me, I got arrested straight as soon as I walked out the court again. They arrested my partner.
So why did you get arrested straight away again?
Because they'd then seen the footage of the run-ups that was in the film. I'd come all the way back to South Australia and gone back.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. And they basically said, okay, here's the deal. We're charging your partner with the run-ups because she was there, and people said she was there. And, you know, once again, mistake that someone said.
Yeah.
And they said, or we can let her out at the transit office, same place she went last time, or let her off out the front if you admit to your throws. So she was hitting me going, don't do it. And I went, no, fuck it. I'm not letting my girlfriend get in trouble for shit I did. So I just, copped the run-ups, and we went through a heap of court cases back and forth with all the adjournments for the panel, and finally ended up with some crazy fines and not allowed on public transport in Victoria and blah, 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 all this shit. And then had to go back to court for the run-ups. And I thought, I'm going to go in for the 3 months because, you know, I've just gotten out of all that. Now I've got run-ups.
Yeah.
So
you had the 3 months
They didn't do them all at once. They separated them. So it was different cases. And then you had to keep coming back and forth.
So they're thinking you're going to get pinned for one of these.
Yeah. The ironic thing is I sat there all day, and I only got a cleaning bill for the run-ups, which was excellent. I still was allowed on public transport in Victoria. I walked out of there, went back to where I was staying, got pulled over that night with pens on me. They didn't find them, and that's when I started making a conscious decision. Enough is enough. So
yeah, wow. So the 3 months was was suspended. You didn't actually have to do.
I didn't go to jail. No.
Yeah.
It's like for cutting the fence and the panel. So it doesn't matter if you cut the fence or he
It's the
cuts the
fact
fence.
that
I
you're
mean,
there.
they cut the fence. Actually, other dudes got charged as well, but because they're Victorian, they got charged before me. They just got fines. You know, because from interstate, they said, we're going to make an example of you. And ironically, the next lot of dudes that got caught was some, you know, Bash type and Fusion, I think it was. They made the example out of them. So I just kept fighting it through. I had lawyers and stuff. I was in debt for quite a bit of time. you know.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So when you're talking about Bash Type and Fusion,
When they got caught in Melbourne, yeah.
that was after what's happened with you.
after, and then that hit the front papers and they got locked up.
So what did they, for hitting yards? Hitting
I think
trains?
I don't know, it's all in Melbourne. From the story I understand is they got their hotel room raided, they had photos of stuff they were doing, all their paint markers, and I don't think they had legal representation. So
And that was in the newspapers and shit.
it was in Adelaide front page.
Because they'd come from Adelaide to Melbourne.
Yeah, I was only page 3 back then earlier because it wasn't as big deal, and you know, so
Shit.
they actually got locked up for it.
Do you remember how long they got locked up for?
I think it was a month or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. At some sort of camp. I really don't know. You'd have to ask them. It's only what dudes have told me. I've never really kind of looked into it. You know. But long story short is it didn't turn out too well, you know, the whole thing.
No, and I mean, I've heard some, horror stories. I mean, that's what makes the graph game different to everything
Yeah,
else,
it
isn't
is.
it? Is the
It
whole, there's the art side of it.
Yeah.
And there's everything else that comes with
Yeah.
it. And I've heard, some fair horror stories. And I couldn't help but notice you mentioned that you've heard stories of, officers pulling guns on dudes.
I know 2 people who are close friends that's happened to.
Without necessarily mentioning names, can you walk through that story?
Oh, one guy was asleep at a train station in Melbourne. He's staying out, and transits came down. They shoved a gun down his throat. A guy from Adelaide, well-known painter, incredible artist. Another guy is an old school Melbourne writer. Similar thing. I think he was on public transport property after hours, and they just got him on his own, put a gun down his throat. Same thing, threatened, and they were saying shit like, I've got mental problems, I should be kicked out the force. I'm going to show you tonight what it's about, that kind of shit. So that's what they told me anyway. So, and I've heard it from other people. Probably won't, that was, you got to remember back in the 80s, a lot of corruption as well. So,
Yeah. Well, I
imagine
heard
the stories that would happen in Sydney, even worse up there. Melbourne's bad, Sydney was bad, but Sydney's probably even crazy as shit.
Yeah, because I've heard stories of like dudes getting caught in the yards by the police and they just whoop them.
I reckon the first time I got hit was 14, when I was about 14. And under suspicion of something in the yard, nothing was done. I was straight away, it was a female cop, I think, was punching me in the back of the head and saying, do something about it, while the other guy cops laughed. And, it's like, what do you do?
Yeah,
can't do
wow.
anything.
So did you personally experience much throughout, I guess, the whole time that you'd been painting?
Yeah, I've had a few things like that. Yeah.
Any memorable...
I reckon getting run over once by them was pretty shit.
Fucking hell.
Or they ran me with a car and I went flying. That was pretty fun.
So what were you doing? Like, I
was cutting through a car park at night with a friend, and they were looking for someone, and they just, nothing to do with graph. They just thought I might have been the person, and they just fucking drove into me and knocked me flying.
So it had nothing to do with painting.
They realised they'd made a mistake and just, they were out of there, man. Yeah.
Thinking that you were somebody else.
Yeah.
And that you were just left there.
Oh yeah.
Fucking hell.
Yeah. So you got to remember the information. Well, that was non-graph related, right?
Yeah.
That was just me cutting through a car park in the city at night, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning with someone, dark spot. It's actually where behind Jive, that nightclub Jive, used to be a shed back in the day. It had a roof on it. It was pitch black in there, cutting through there. People used to park their cars in there when I go to nightclubs, and so that sort of happened there. But I've had a few other, experiences like that too. So yeah.
You mentioned that, obviously you spent some time in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And I think the crew, is it Suicide Assassins?
Yeah, Melbourne Suicidal Assassins, yeah.
And I was speaking to someone and they actually said something about the Grey Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
which is a particular, like a rare, type of like carriage.
Yeah, it was just like one train that they used to run on the Sandringham line. So we went to do panels and we found the ghost. It was on the outer row, fully lit up, right by where cars passing by. And we're like, we can either do the side that's in the rows that, won't be probably detected. And we could probably spend a little bit longer, because you get like 40 minutes, whatever it is. Or we can just go all out and do the outside row and we'll get flicks easier. And we went for the outside row. So we pushed the time a little, but it was an amazing experience, So that ran for years for some reason. I have no idea why. Even when it was buffed, it ran for years, because the stuff I used on my outline was just this old wattle, sort of like a Kuros brand paint. It was ancient, I'd found it in a supermarket, dust all over it. It'd been there for years. Grabbed 3 cans of black, 2 cans of white. I think I used 2 blacks and a white on the outline and the highlights. And just when they buffed it, just the black had eaten into the paint that just wouldn't come off. So there's a photo floating around somewhere that I think Ray from TDC took years later. Just standing at Richmond, it just came past. He just went click. You can still read all the tags. Part of the outline was still there. I have no idea why,
Yeah, wow.
So I'd catch that train maybe, sometimes twice a day, because it ran a 9 and a 3 or something like that to the city and back on my line. So that was cool, me and my friends catching the train with the names on it, that kind of thing. So,
and why was that such a special train?
It was the only one in the system that was grey and flat. It was like the old Blue Harris trains that they used to run in Melbourne.
So it was just perfect to paint on.
Just dead flat, same as Blue Harris, same structure, just painted light grey. It was just known as the Grey Ghost. So it was a ghost in the system, hard to track. So,
and then I guess spending time, painting in Melbourne and painting in Adelaide. What are some of the, I guess, key differences, if any?
Adelaide's tiny. Melbourne's expansive. So many different, yards, layups, spots, track sides. People do insides, loops. In Adelaide, you've just kind of got your direct lines. I'll be honest, when I moved up here, I lost all interest in graph for a bit, because the train thing was so hard to do. And I was like, do I want to go down this path of, getting into spots and stuff like that? They were buffing the lines. I don't know. I was just so into the freight thing with throw-ups and stuff. It just killed the buzz for me. It just wasn't the same. And my interest had changed other areas as well at the time. And I sort of stopped, but then I kind of started painting a little bit again. And I got back into it. And, I started doing kind of projects and stuff that were related to aerosol stuff. So, I wanted to be an artist before I even knew about graph. And I was always told, no, you can't do that. It's not a job. You will never get anywhere. Or, this is teachers, parents. Not my parents. They were really good. But, girlfriends, parents, all this kind of shit. They always say, no, you can't be an artist. You can't do this, you can't do that. There was no support where I lived. There was no school. There was no art school. I didn't have the money to come to the city to do it. So my idea was like, when I got an opportunity to do a few, not just legal pieces, being exhibition-based things or things that interest me, I took the opportunity and got involved with it, because it was what I wanted to do prior to graph anyway. So, and it just kind of started happening from there.
The transition.
Yeah, the transition. So, like everyone would go to this place, Spray Graphics, where they'd give kids paint and you could paint walls and all that kind of stuff. And then at one stage they organised all these canvases for a big show. Everyone painted canvases, and I was really into it. Didn't have the opportunity to do that. My canvases was a blind I found on the street, or a piece of wood I drag home, or things I could paint on. I could never afford a canvas or anything like that. So you sort of had some good opportunities through some of these youth agencies. But one of the best things was the amount of paint you could get was out of control. It's like, no one could afford that amount of paint. You know what I mean? And when we're kids, I didn't have an income. So we'd have to get all our paint the only way we knew how. And when I came to the city, the way how was instead of going around and racking out of shops or grabbing paint from places, was you do work that would pay for your paint. So I say jobs, back then it might be a $600 job. You know, you might sell paints for $100. You use $100 worth of paint, the rest goes in your pocket. It's just the way it is, any business. So I thought the smarter thing to do would be not pay for my materials, but not rack. So I'd gone through some changes. You know, I didn't want to get in trouble anymore.
So I guess like most, if not almost all riders back in the day used to rack the paint, the big coats.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that had money for paint. I didn't have an income as a kid, you know, and it was harder where we were because there weren't many stores. So you can only go in so many times. People know who we are. They know that you do stuff around town. So we'd go for journeys in the car, you know, that kind of, I didn't have a car, but other people would take us. You know, a couple of girls that had their license would drive us to spots and
like the different distance.
Yeah, I'm talking like interstate type thing over the border and different areas and
just to get paint.
Just to get paint, yeah.
Yeah.
Rural spots, country towns, all kinds of places.
So then if you're driving that far out to get paint, you guys aren't getting like 3-5 tins, you guys are getting...
No, you can't. It's not worth it. It's too far, you know. You got to get a lot or it's just not worth it. So, you know.
So I guess for someone who never experienced that, how did you guys back then? Because obviously now it's different.
Yeah.
Like even I know now that if you walk into Bunnings, everything's caged off.
Yeah.
And you can't just do that. I don't even know how you would do it now. And now you've got shops.
Well, they used to actually use a postcode for Bunnings. This years ago, I don't know if people knew this, but the postcode was the cage lock for years. I don't know how many people knew that.
So how did you know that?
I worked it out. You watch people when they're doing the combination, you know, they leave the cage open or something.
And did you try that in different Bunnings?
Yeah.
And it worked every time?
Not every time, but
a lot of times. So you'd go
I'd stop racking, so it didn't matter, you know. But I'd still open the cages and freak them out
and
and
it's
stuff
still...
and get a few tins here and there, but I wasn't really into it. It's just one of those, it's just in your mind. You go, well, that's obvious, you know. It's clueless. It's kind of stupid.
Yeah, wow. So I guess when you're going into something like that, and when you were doing that back in the day, because I seen, is it Star Wars, when I seen that as the dude, he's talking about they used to go on with the big coats.
Yeah,
and they would just stuff their coats and their pants. I'm assuming you guys were doing the same sort of shit.
Where we lived, it was freezing all the time, or not in summer, but so I was wearing jackets constantly, hoodies or whatever. So you just obtain sometimes bags, depending. It really came down to who you're with. There's one guy that was really good, Raid. He would get a lot of paint, and when I was with him, so would I, and we would sort of help each other out, you know. And then other times it'd be just like same thing. A youth council would say, "Hey, we've got this job. We can't pay you because you're under 18, but we can supply X amount of paint. Would that be enough?" We go, "No, it's got to be this amount," and we've got to take the paint home to test it, and then we'll bring what we need to the job. So you know,
started getting paint that way.
That's how you get paint. Yeah, you're just smart, you know.
Yeah, word.
You don't have to do anything wrong. You just obtain it, invent it, you know.
Well, that's business, like you say.
Yeah. Well, we weren't in business. We were in business of painting. And
but you were
paint.
doing it.
Yeah, but we were still getting paint. Yeah. Like I don't know anyone. Like I remember when we were young, a couple of times we would all chuck in $1 and get a touch up, and we'd ride our BMXs. It's like 85, 86 or something, probably 85, or even 84. And you know, what little money you had, if you could scrape together one afternoon, you might grab a can of Kill Rust or a certain touch-up colour, you know, and we'd just cruise around our bikes and pass it around, drop tags. Tags were this big and tiny and more like little logos back then. It weren't these big fat cap things. There's no fat caps. It's all fine line kind of stuff. And actually tags in Adelaide, I remember one thing I really liked in the early days were really well done. They always had a little bit of flair or something original to each one. Similar styles in some way, but they were, you know, this big and they were neat and they looked good. And, you know, we would always do smaller tags to get more paint out of the paint, you know. Once the freights, you do a throw up, you want it as big as possible. But I recently saw some of the ones I did when I was young, tracked them down and just came across them on the internet. Some of them were like this big, but I would have been up to this high, you know, a bit taller and tiny. And and ones you see a few years later, they're fucking 3 times the size, because as you get older and better paint or you learn more, you go bigger kind of thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
Obviously, when you've been transitioning, you know, into, I guess, you know, starting by figuring out, hey, I can get paint legit this way.
Yeah.
And obviously one thing progresses to another.
Yeah, yeah.
At which point did you, because I know that you opened up the shop.
Yeah. So what happened was maybe 98, we had a studio in Prospect. Me, my partner Suze and her sister rented out an old shop. It was just an empty old bookshop. And we would, like my partner, she made jewellery, her sister was doing some form of jewellery, I was making paintings, and we were also making clothing as well. So we had a brand KAB101. We didn't really wholesale it, we were just selling it out of the bag kind of thing. The people started knocking on the door. Can we buy a few hoodies? Can we buy a hat? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, come in guys, blah, blah, blah. No shop, just a few desks, a couple of boxes of clothes, a jewellery making bench, and there was a shed out the back that I used to paint in that had no power, so I'd just rig up a power cord and a fluoro and dirt floor, that kind of thing, so I could make as much mess as I want. It was good. So people kept knocking on the door, and then at one stage we were like, well, you know, why don't we try and do this, just sell what we sell and other artists what they make. And we decided to open up in 99, and that's the second Area 101. The first Area 101 was the studio above Eckersley's, that group of us all shared, and it was just called Area 101, just the name I came up with as for a name. And so we decided to open Prospect as Area 101 with a clothing brand OK101 by KAB101. All got a bit confusing, you know what I mean? But that's what we did at the time. And my partner would sell our jewellery. Shime used to bring in Rust-Oleum, Belton, American Accents, and I believe one other brand, might have been Anchor or some Malaysian paint. So we started putting paint in the store. We had all our own hoodies, t-shirts, beanies, anti-surveillance masks, things that we just made, jewellery. We started stocking books and magazines. We had other people's clothing, fat laces, like b-boy fat laces, really hard to get back then. We used to get them from Pro Bowl in Goodwood in 86. That had dried out years ago, and then the only people that had them were, you know, those shoe care places, these Waiparu ones that just fell apart. So we'd go, okay, we'll get 600 pairs in from the States. And so we had all the fat laces, just niche kind of stuff, nozzles, you know, all kinds of stuff really, just whatever we could get our hands on that was interesting and that we could afford to buy and resell. We didn't have any money starting up. We didn't have a loan. No one helped us out. We just generated through selling t-shirts and me doing a bit of painting work, which wasn't very big back then, you know. You didn't get paid very much. Sold a few paintings as well. Just whatever money we put in to make it happen. And then built it up.
Yeah, so how did you, over how many years?
Yeah, so like we were there for 3 years. And I think it was 93 or 92, I can't remember exact. We decided to step it up a little. We go, let's go to the city. So I think what happened was, I can't remember exactly. I must have come into some money, or my partner did or something. I'm not sure exactly. We had a little bit of money. We got a lease in Harley Street for a lot bigger shop. Originally it was going to be a small shop in Twin Street. This is prior to Clinic 116. It was directly across the road, an old abandoned pet store. We actually had that for a while. We were going to fix it up, but just too many repairs. It was derelict pretty much. They turned around and said, we can't let you keep leasing it. Well, we hadn't paid at this point. We'd signed everything. They came in and they did an evaluation, went, this place is condemned. And we said, we can fix it. And they were like, no, you can't. It's just legally not happening. So that didn't happen. So we started looking up around Hindley Street area because we thought, oh, there's a lot of rental properties. We were going to take the old Grecian Cave, which is a bar, I believe now, had super mold downstairs. That place was disgusting. It was just because it had been a souvlaki bar for years. They never cleaned it when they moved out. Oil everywhere. We just looked at it and went, this is just too hard. It's like the derelict shop. Same thing. It's too much work. We looked across the shop, this big empty shop. We're like, fuck it, let's just go in there and ask them. So we got the land people's details, asked them what the rent is, negotiated, you know, kept knocking them down, finally got a price we could afford for X amount of years. It went right, and we just started it, dude. You know, it just started happening, you know. I poured all the money that we had into building walls and painting walls and clear glossing the floor and building racks out of fencing poles. Like, so we did everything very urban and industrial and all yourself DIY kind of make it happen yourself kind of style. Then we started getting in some other brands. So Carhartt, Obey, a few other sort of weird Japanese t-shirt brands that was through the guys at Flipside in Sydney. They hooked us up with. Just other clothing stuff all together. And, you know, we'd had our original first exhibitions at 99 in the shop in Prospect. So Masca did the first show, we had a few after that. So we just started having big group shows there. So on a Friday night, it wouldn't be unusual to see 30 people in there looking at art and, you know, stuff that was affordable, stuff, you know, street art or whatever you want to call it, or design or stuff related to graph or tattooing or something like that. You know, there's always something going on. Had a couple of turntables set up there. We play all kinds of music, whatever you want, you know, whatever we want, sort of thing. There's no set. This is this kind of shop, you know. So. And
then, what year did you like close up the shop, and why did you decide to close it up then?
What happened a few years down the track with the big shop, they turned around and said we want to double the rent. And we went into negotiations. They just didn't care. The guy it was in the name of some kid over in China, you know, they didn't care if it was empty or not. It's a tax write-off. So we moved into the Greater Union Complex to a much smaller shop, had to really shrink it all down, kept it pretty slick. Stayed there for a while, similar thing. They wanted new tenancies to put rent up. We then moved to Ebenezer Place. And I think around that period, it was just getting into that period where I'd had enough talking to people, you know. It's kind of like, there's only so many people you can put up with who ask stupid questions or just basically not very intelligent, you know. They're great people as well, amazing people, but just, I don't know, Joe Public can be a bit of a bore thing after a while. And so I wasn't into it as much anymore. And it got to the point where retail was slowly becoming less, like we had a lot of brands that other people didn't have. They started to kind of just allow other shops to have the same stuff in the same state, which kind of killed it, which it did. And so we just went, you know, we'll just, let's move on. And a friend of ours was interested in it, and we actually sold it to him. And he kept it running for a few years and then just decided he worked with bands a lot, Big Jim, and he just decided he'd rather tour with bands and not have the responsibility, and I can understand that. It's a lot of work. You don't shut the shop at 6. You go to sleep at 4 in the morning, and someone's opening at 10 or 11. You're up drawing all night. It's not just working in the shop taking money. A lot more goes on behind the scenes. So. Yeah.
And then, so what year was it that you sold it, and what year was it that he completely just packed it up?
I think it must have been roughly 2005. I think. No, 2007, sorry. So it was maybe 2000. I'm not sure, you know. All I know is I'd had enough. I wanted out. And it was just coincidental that he wanted to do something at the time. And so he took it on and bought it. And we hung around in Adelaide for a while. And then eventually I decided to go down the coast and live down in Victor for a couple of years just to have some disconnect, work on art. So that's pretty much what we did. Just went down there, which is, it's God's waiting room, man. There's not much going on for youth or anyone that's interested in anything beyond retiring, you know. Yeah. So I was going a bit nuts there. Met some cool people down in Galway, some surfer, skater kind of kids that were good, and they did a bit of writing and stuff, but never painted down there anywhere. Did one painting under a underpass or something one time, and a little bit of other stuff around the place, but never really painted in Victor at all, except for helped a youth group out occasionally. Did some workshops where I just showed kids with disabilities how to paint and helped them out, and a couple of kids with problems, and that was good, giving something back. So I'd done workshops years and years ago, but I turned my back on it. I'd had enough. But with those guys, the kids with disabilities, that was good, you know. I felt a lot for it, enjoyed it, you know. It's not what I'd want to do, but it was good to
do it.
Good to do it, you know.
Get a hand in
like
there.
David had to paint this mural. I still wouldn't do the whole thing where I took over to make it look the best. I'd make them do it and I'd fix it up a bit. I'd still like it. It's theirs, you know. It's not mine. So I just enjoyed the process of seeing the smile on these guys' faces and them producing something that they're proud of, that they'd never normally get the time of day to do, or maybe they're too shy, or they just don't speak to people that well, and gave them an outlet, which was cool, you know.
Do you have any memorable, like standout memorable moments where, you know, for whatever reason, maybe it's a certain piece, a certain, you know, spot or yard that you hit that really sort of resonates even till today?
I don't know. Some of my favourite experiences were being in tunnels underground. So Sydney is good, you know, like that. Going to some of these labs or ex-labs. They're not, you know, they don't stable trains there anymore. So just exploring. They were probably some of the funnest times I've had with friends. So one night it was Dash, KAB, Code from TDC. We all went to St James Domain, St James Tunnel, where there's the lap trains in Sydney, and just the way you get in, and you know, key to the gate, down this fucking giant ladder in this cave to get down to where these the park trains. Trains are going through these, past on these gaps in between, and you know, just all stuff like that was cool and exploring. I don't really think any of the, you know, like for me, I'd spent a lot of time when I was younger in the freight yard on my own. Go a lot on my own. You don't have to worry about anyone else except yourself. And just going, there was one spot we called the pole. It's just this pole you could climb up, do top to bottom throw up. You know, only one letter, two letter, because there's only one pole. Or there's other platform spots and stuff. And just things like that, you know, or just hanging out with Boots and Risk and people like that, and doing painting with them, or prior to even Graph, or like, not painting, but just looking for spots or exploring was probably just as exciting as the actual painting, depending on what it was. Coming across a big stash of paint somewhere, things like that. Not necessarily the action of the painting, the outcome or the prep or the something to do with the painting, but not necessarily the piece itself. So, you know, it's those sort of stories are kind of more interesting to me. I sort of remember friendships and just meeting people that are cool people, you know, good artists, and they got their head screwed on right. It's nothing worse than meeting a good artist and they're a wanker or something. You just go, I don't want to look at his shit anymore, you know. But most guys I've met are pretty cool guys, and the ones that are interested in the style side of it are all pretty, you know, good dudes and stuff. So I reckon it's the friendships, the exploration, the paint, finding vintage paint, that kind of stuff. Piecing, it's, you know, when I was younger, it was so fun. I'd be hanging under stars, whatever time in the morning, sleeping out, trying to get your photos as the sun's coming up before the freight goes, because once they're gone, you know, sometimes you don't see them again. That sort of stuff. Going to Melbourne and seeing something that you've done years ago, sitting at a station, laid up, like, you know, it'd end up parked there, you know, and going, fuck. Or sitting at the bench, Richmond, with all the MSA guys, and a freight comes past and I've got two pieces or X amount of throw-ups on there as well. You know, just things like that, I think, are probably more than the actual painting itself.
The lesson. 27. Oh, yeah.